Agile panel here. We've got some absolutely fantastic people on the panel, so I hope you've brought really tough, gnarly questions for them to answer on your behalf. You know, give you guys the wisdom of their years. I mean, their combined years, it's got to be going on bloody 250. You guys are getting on in age. But anyway, you know, we're talking about Agile in the large, and so you've seen Dave Thomas talk earlier today about some high level, you know, how you do Agile transformations in very large organizations, and some other tips there. Randall Ward, here in the black shirt from Appfire, they're one of our Atlassian experts. Randall and his team at Appfire get the opportunity to visit many of our largest customers and assist them with their Agile transformations, and they get to visit them on an ongoing basis. So he's got a lot of different customer stories perhaps that he can share with us. Jean-Michel is the Atlassian VP of Engineering. Jean-Michel actually comes from a background at Eclipse and then on to IBM in the Rational division. So he's got tons of years of experience there. David Jellison, you saw speak earlier. David's done or in the process of and just completing a Kanban implementation for his enterprise. They've got 1,000 people at Constant Contact. And finally on the end here, we've got Jürgen Spangl, and Jürgen is the design manager here at Atlassian. And Jürgen, we're bringing Jürgen along because these days we're hearing more and more about user experience, even in the enterprise. And so I think it's perhaps necessary for enterprise applications, and perhaps you're seeing it yourselves. So with that in mind, I'd like to open it up to the audience. I've got a mic. My colleague Dave back here, he has a mic. So when you'd like to ask a question, please just raise your hand and we'll run down and direct it to a particular participant on the panel. Who'd like to start? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, do you have experience with Agile in the embedded environment, particularly large embedded systems with rather maybe 2 deliveries a year to the customer?
Telcos, process control, oscilloscopes, instrumentation. So the answer is yes. Is there something else you want to know?
Yeah, so how did you make that work given the fact it doesn't have a regular delivery schedule, at least externally? And you know, you have lots of dependencies and getting the stories and the prioritization right.
So I don't know whether you were at my earlier talk, which went far too quickly, but we have a process that basically splits up into 4 activities: envisioning, which basically figures out what you're going to build; definition, which basically does multi-point estimates and allocates things to feature and component teams; and we do both hardware and software with the same process. So, because you have to do hardware software co-design typically. And then we basically have a traditional Agile for the actual development build process, and then a release engineering or DevOps process at the back end. You know, we have an estimation process that's more like adults do, as opposed to, you know, the happy. You know, it's good that people learn how to do story points, but in the end, we're spending, you know, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars, so we have to convert everything to dollars and so on. So we have a process for doing that. We've been building embedded systems this way since the late 80s.
I just have a follow-on to that. So there's 2 embedded customers here that we work with, and I can happily introduce you to them afterwards. And they're using Agile, implemented the process about 18 months ago, and they're doing pretty amazing things with embedded systems. So if you can come find me, I'll hook you up with them. Great.
Hi. I have a kind of more general maybe question. Our company just started with Agile processes. We bought Greenhopper. Actually, we have Jira, we have Bonfire, we have a lot of Confluence, all these plugins. So the question is the following. So we, in the Greenhopper, we create stories. Then the sprint will be considered as completed as we have acceptance tests. So, but to me, it's not enough. Acceptance tests is just repeating, making sure that the stories work. But if during the stories development, some other bugs will be introduced, and they're not directly related to the stories. So the stories will pass, but a lot of other aspects are not covered, like performance tests, some upgrades tests, so other kind of tests. How is it supported? First of all, what is the process? What is the methodology do you kind of recommend? And how is it supported within the Atlassian tools?
Maybe I'll say something a bit controversial, but I find that iteration lines cause a lot of bad behavior. People see these iteration lines, iteration 1 and 2, and they try and squeeze everything in, and if it doesn't fit over that line, I've got to do something else with it. So there's definitely a trend now of doing more feature-based development, which helps to solve that, which is I've got to get some value out, and there's some performance testing, criteria, usability testing that has to be done to make that feature awesome, and you just do the right things to make that feature actually work, as opposed to get hung up with these boundaries. And so that's a bit more like feature-based development, which is iteratively you say you've got a story or an epic, and when that epic's ready, you're going to do the right things to make that happen, whether it's a bit more upfront design or estimation, or maybe it's a bit more soak time, and that you just don't get hung up with those iteration boundaries. So I don't know.
Quick comment, if you don't use, you have to write a story for every performance requirement.
Maybe I'll say something a bit
Basically, non-functional requirements are BS. Right? If you don't
bad
have a story for it,
People
developer can't test it, so it won't happen. So, if you don't have stories for the performance for a given feature, don't expect it to be performance. Same for the usability or fault tolerance or whatever it is. You have to qualify what that means, so that done means I ran all the stories, including those.
Testing that has to be done to make that feature awesome, and you just do the right things to make that feature actually work, as opposed to get hung up with these boundaries.
So
So that's a bit more like feature-based development,
Can you repeat the follow-up
which is
question?
iteratively you say you've got a story or an epic, and when that epic's
I'm going to attempt
ready,
to restate the
you're going to
question.
do the right things
So,
to make that happen.
the way I understand it is that
upfront design or estimation,
we
or
have
maybe it's a bit more
traceability
soak
for
time,
stories
and that you just don't get
covering
hung up with those
acceptance
iterations.
criteria.
So I don't know.
Sorry. I'll start over. The question, the way I understand it is that for stories, you have acceptance criteria and tests to validate that the acceptance criteria passes.
If you don't have a story
But that's
for it,
only part of
developer can't
the answer,
test it,
right? That
so it
you
won't
really
happen.
need to
If you don't have
cover
stories for the
a full
performance
gamut
for
of
a given
testing
feature,
across the
don't
application
expect it to be
stack and
performance.
the
Same for
organization.
usability
And how do
or,
you manage that?
fault
right?
tolerance or whatever it is.
And
Have
more
to
specifically,
qualify
how do you
what
manage that
means
with
so that
Atlassian
done
tools?
means
I believe you
ran all
asked.
the stories,
So
including those.
as a director of quality at Constant Contact, we have to deal with this question, of course, holistically. So we have not only the story work, but we have layers of promotion through, because we are a SaaS application, layers of expectations up through the promotion of our test environments out to production for regression testing. So we have testing in the sandbox, which is really covering all the features completely, in addition to whatever the stories are, right? So that we have quality engineers embedded in the teams. Traditional test techniques still apply, right? We're not throwing them out. We're just organizing a little bit differently. But as you complete a feature, you're completing the acceptance criteria, but you're also creating regression tests. You're making sure that you've got enough coverage on the functionality, both positive and negative, how that works as an integration with other dependencies and other parts of the system. Performance tests are, in an Agile world, you really want to test early and often with performance testing, and then test, in a full environment and test that heavily. So I agree with adding stories where you need to, but in many cases, it should be part of the cultural practices within the team to have complete coverage for the features that you're writing, that you're creating, and that's part of the activities that the quality engineering team provides within teams. We have quality engineers embedded in
Next
teams.
question.
Traditional test techniques still apply, right? We're not throwing them out.
Okay, after we understand and our functional requirements, and we have major building blocks on the software design side, we struggle in getting the requirements for those because part of that is based on how well we can do. In other words, there's kind of what we want and what we need. And I'm just wondering if you can talk about how you work through that ambiguity, because it's not the functional guys who understand the business requirements, but it's more of the back-end architectural component side of it. So it's not the simple feature that does X, Y, Z that everybody understands. It's the back-end reliability, performance. Yeah, I'd like that search to happen in a half a second, but I'll take a second. So the requirement's not a hard one, and you need we need the software guys, the designers, to be able to give us an idea of what a reasonable requirement is. How do you our functional merge those two together? Deal with that. Functional requirements. And where in the process? Major building blocks.
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. So is the question more along the lines of not working close enough with that team, in alignment with that team to gather the requirements? Or is it that you feel like you're held up in your iteration waiting for those requirements to be gathered? Is it more of a timing, or is it more of a interaction with the team?
I think it's an interaction with the team, because you got these designers who want the requirements first, and they have to give key input into making those requirements.
Yeah, I think if they're the business owner, if they're the owner of that requirement, or the designers are actually contributing towards that requirement, bringing them closer to the actual owner who's issued the requirement, along with those engineers behind the scenes that are actually going to be issuing the design, that's going to work out best for you. And iterate, right? So you've got to have those frequent sessions working with them to gather the requirements. I think what happens more frequently and more often than not, what we see in the enterprise is there's a middleman that's getting in the way, and so if you can remove the broker and actually put the two people together in the room, you'll hash out the requirements faster.
One of the classic problems is that, for instance, the people who do the database work basically don't get talked to until the Agile team tells them make the changes. So, and one of the things we've had to do with both UI and database teams is yank those people out and spread them around, because you need to have somebody who understands. Most computer scientists or end users do not understand SQL, period end. And so if you end up having to do SQL in your back end and it has to be performant, you need to know that really early. If this thing's got to do some sort of inner outer join, so you need someone in the requirements team. That's why we do envisioning. We basically try and build the whole thing quickly, have it blow up, and say, here's the characteristics, and you have a crack database guy in there saying, look, if you're going to do this, we're going to have to schema restructure, we're going to maybe have to switch, use an in-memory database or something like that, because we can't get this performance out of our Oracle stack or whatever it is. So you need to have those people involved early, participating in the requirements, too often downstream. The other issue is sometimes the requirement is articulated and understood by someone like an architect or someone who's experienced in the product, but not by a technical specialist. And so that's why you like to have a playing coach who can sort of say, look, here's what the business said, they need this to be responsive. Here's what responsive means, so they can actually translate for them. And that's why you want experienced people walking around and talking to people. You need to know that.
Can we get Jürgen in on that?
This thing's got to do some sort of inner outer join. So you need
interested to
someone in
hear
the
Jürgen's
requirements team.
take,
That's
because
why we
you
do
mentioned user
envisioning. We
experience,
basically try and build
So
the whole thing
one way to address
quickly,
this is
have
what
it
we
blow
try to
up,
do is
and say, here's the
visualize
characteristics, and
requirements
you have
early
one-
on,
a crack
and the
database
requirements
guy in there
process is
saying, look,
actually
you're gonna
more than
do
just
this, we're gonna
writing
have
it
to
down. It's
schema
actually a
restructure, we're gonna
conversation,
maybe have to
and it
switch,
involves
use an
the
in-memory
backend engineers, the
database or
engineers, the
something
business
like that,
owner,
because we can't
and
get
we
this performance out of
we
our,
communicate early on,
Oracle
like,
stack or whatever
hey, what do
it
you
is.
mean?
So
We
you need to
sketch
have
it
those
quickly,
people involved
and this
early,
also factors in how
participating in
fast
the
could we do this
requirements
stuff,
too
because I
often
would design
downstream.
differently
The other issue is
for
sometimes
something
the
which would
requirement
give
is
a
articulated
response in 2
understood
seconds
by
versus 2
someone like an
milliseconds, and I can
architect or
address this with
someone who's experienced in the product,
the visual
but not by
design
a
and actually
technical
work around
specialist.
certain things, so
And
it's
so
not a
that's
hard
why you like to
requirement.
have a
This has
playing
to
coach who can
answer in
sort
2
of say,
milliseconds.
look, here's
Ideally
what
it
the
would,
business said,
but
they need
very
this
often
to be
it's not possible.
responsive. Here's what
And so it's
responsive
key
means, so they can actually
to get them constantly
translate
involved,
for them.
and
That's why you
one of the
want
things what we
experienced
have is
people walking
the business
around
owner
and
has to
talking
be present. Like I've worked in agile environments
get
where
Jürgen in on
the
that?
business owner is only available at the beginning of the sprint and then only shows up at the
I was
very end.
interested to hear
And this
Jürgen's
is
take, because you mentioned
usually
user
not working.
experience
So one way to address this is what we try to do is
add to
visualize
this.
requirements early on, and the requirements process is
I
actually
see that there are
more than
two
just writing it
opportunities
down. It's actually a
to
conversation,
really fit out
and
some
it
of these
involves
requirements early
backend
on, the team
engineers,
needs to be
the
having
business
design
owner,
reviews and thinking
and
through some of these things.
we communicate
and inviting
early on,
architect to those
hey, what do you mean?
discussions,
We sketch it
where
quickly,
possible.
and this also
We also
factors
do something
in
in constant
how
contact
fast
called
could
an
we do this
LPG,
stuff,
an
because I would
operational
design
program group
differently
session
for
where
something
we're
which
changing
would
anything
give
that's going into
a
a
response
system.
in 2 seconds
We have a
versus 2
larger group that
milliseconds, and I can
assembles,
address this with
before we introduce that to the system.
visual
We
design
talk
and
through the
actually work
architecture,
around
talk through
certain
performance
things, so it's not a hard
requirements. We talk
requirement. It
through,
has to answer
any
in
of
2
those things that
milliseconds.
are
Ideally, it would,
beyond
but
what
very
was
often it's not
originally set up
possible.
as,
And so it's key
acceptance criteria for
to get them
that
constantly
particular
involved. And
feature or that work.
one of the things
That's
what
been
we have
working
is
out well for us.
the business owner has to be present. Like I've worked in agile
we have a question in
environments
the back of
where
the room here.
the business owner is only available at the beginning of the sprint and then only shows up
Hi,
at the very end.
in
and this is
Kanban, without
usually not working.
the Scrum boundaries, I'm wondering what's the cadence of the analysis and design
Add to this.
for you guys? When do you
So
do
I-
the
I-
story point
I see that
sizing?
there are
When do you do
two
detailed
opportunities
analysis
to,
and sizing?
to really fit out some of these requirements. Early on, the team needs to be having design reviews. And
What do you
thinking
mean by
through some of these
cadence in
things
terms of how much
and
time you
inviting an
spend on it,
architect to
or?
those
Well, with
discussions,
in Scrum,
where
you know, you
possible.
might do
We
sprint
also do
planning every
something in constant
iteration. You're
contact
going
called
to do
an
high-level
LPG, an
sizing. You're going to spend
operational
some time doing
session
detailed
where we're
analysis
changing anything
without
that's going
those
into a
Scrum
system.
boundaries.
We have a larger
In the
group that
Kanban
assembles, before
process,
we introduce that
constant
to the
flow,
system.
I'm
We talk
wondering
through the
when do you have
architecture,
the
we talk
time,
through
or when do you
performance
take the time
requirements, we talk through
to take new
any of
stories,
those things that are
do that
beyond
analysis and
what was
design,
originally set up
put
as,
story points on them?
acceptance criteria for
That kind of
that particular
You
feature.
do that all up front?
He's got a one-liner.
And that's been working out well for us.
There's a very old rule called the 80-hour rule.
So we have a question in the back of the room
Seems
here.
almost to be 2 weeks. And if you let someone give something for
Hi,
people and just let them
in
go off for more than
Kanban,
80
without
hours,
the-
yeah,
Without
you
the
get what
Scrum
you paid
boundaries,
for.
I'm wondering what's
So,
the cadence
I think
analysis
I
and
guess I'm
design
an advocate for Scrum
you
Bond,
guys?
but I mean, basically, if
When
you
you
let
do
people
the
go
story
open
point
loop for
sizing,
too
when
long,
you
you're
do
really in
detailed
trouble. So
analysis and
it
sizing.
helps to have a clock. Maybe you don't need an alarm bell ringing, but it's useful to have some kind of
What do you mean by
pulse on the
cadence in
team.
terms of how
And
much
2
time
weeks
you
is what it
spend
should
on
be.
it, or?
Well, in Scrum, you know, you might do sprint planning every iteration. You're going to do high-level
yes.
sizing. You're going to spend some time
We are
doing detailed
currently
analysis
set up to
without
do
those Scrum
waterfall.
boundaries.
And obviously our
in the
Jira,
Kanban
the way we have Jira set up, would only support
constant
the
flow. I'm
waterfall.
wondering when do you
But
have
we're
the
looking
time,
to
or when do you
move
take
to
the
the
time
Agile
take new
methodology.
stories?
I was wondering if
analysis and
any of you
design,
had some
put story
words
points
to the
on
wise of how to
that kind of
actually get started
all
to
up
make
front?
sure that we don't do too many
There's a
faux
very old
pas
rule
while we're-
called the
we're getting
80-hour
this set
rule.
up. I
Seems
got
almost to
from
be
the
2
last
weeks.
session
And
that
if you let
I
someone
need to make
give
sure we
something
have
for the
fish eye
people and
and that
just
we
let
need
them
to
go off
have
for more than 80
bonfire.
hours, you get
but
what you
any
paid
words
for.
of wisdom or,
So,
definitely do
I
this
think
or
I guess
for the
I'm an
love of God,
advocate for
don't ever
Scrum
do
Bond,
that.
but I mean,
We
basically, if you
appreciate
let people go open loop for too long, you're really
Do
in trouble.
something without
So
the tools
It helps
first.
to have a clock.
Do it
Maybe
by
you don't
hand
need an
so you
alarm bell
experience
ringing,
it.
But it's useful to
Yeah,
have
it's very
some kind
important. There's a lot of
pulse on
cognitive
the
things
team.
that go on
And
when
2
you
weeks
put
is what
cards
it
on the
should
wall
be.
and do it.
So do something small. Make sure you actually understand the process before you worry about tooling.
yes.
Yeah, I
We
couldn't agree
are
more.
currently set
Manual
up to
process
do
first,
waterfall.
really learn
And
the
obviously
behaviors,
our
learn the
Jira, the way
techniques,
we have
get
Jira
the
set up
cadence
would
down
only
with the team,
support
bring them
the
together.
waterfall. But
So
we're
that's
looking to
definitely a
move
great
to
first
the
step. The
Agile
other thing is the
methodology.
education
I
throughout
was
the organization.
wondering
Set a
if
goal.
any
What
of
is the
you
goal of
had
moving to
some
this process?
words
Where do we
to
want to
the
be in
wise of
3,
how
6,
to
9 months?
actually
Write
get
those things
started
down
to
together
make sure that we
and then
don't
revisit
do
those after
too many
a time
uh,
period.
faux pas while we're getting this set up.
Yeah,
I
and remember your goal
got
is to
from the
really
last
build
session
something.
that
Like your
I
team's
need to
building
make sure
something,
we
it's
have
not the
fish eye
process.
and that we need
So,
to have
like your goal is to
bonfire.
get better at building something. So maybe
but
your
any
success
words of
criteria is:
wisdom
are you
or,
getting,
you know,
are you measuring
definitely do this
the actual
or
output that you're doing,
for the love of
and
God,
then
don't ever
build
do
the things
that.
into
We
the way your team
appreciate
works to actually make sure you're building something better.
Do
So
something
a
without
year
the
from now,
tools
don't look
first.
back and say we have an
Do
awesome
it by
process,
hand
but
so
we're
you
still building
experience
shitty
it.
stuff. So.
You know, it's very important. There's a lot of cognitive things that go on when you put cards on the wall
I
and
have
do it.
a few
So
thoughts
do
on that.
something
One is
small.
that, I
Make
agree
sure you
with
actually
doing it,
understand the
before the
process
tool,
before you
getting
worry
it
about
down
tooling.
Pat, we for
Yeah, I
when we
couldn't
went to
agree
Kanban,
more.
we used
Manual
whiteboards with
process first,
container tape
really really learn the
sticky notes to get
behaviors,
the
learn the
process down
techniques,
first before we
get
went
the
to a tool
cadence down with the
made a
team,
huge
bring them
difference, 'cause
together.
what we end up with
So
the tool
that's
is different
definitely
than
a
what we
great,
started
great
with.
first step. The other thing is the
I think as
education
far as,
throughout the organization. Set a
getting
goal.
started,
What is the goal of moving to this
understanding
process?
what
Where do
doneness
we want
is,
to be
define
in
doneness for
3,
you,
6, 9
so
months?
that
Write
each
those
iteration
things
you're
down
actually completing
together,
work that's
and then
deliverable,
revisit those
either
after
internally or
after a time
externally.
period.
That's the magic of Agile. If you can
Yeah,
do that,
and remember your goal is to
everything
really
else will
build
follow.
something. Like your team's
And
building
another
something, it's
thing
not the
about getting
process.
started, we
So,
found that,
like your goal is to get better at
two-
building something.
2
So
points
maybe
of,
your success criteria is: are you getting,
important
are you
to be
measuring
successful. One
the
is
actual
that,
output that you're doing,
having
and
a
then
pilot
build
team,
the things
a team
into
that
your
can
the way your
really,
team works to actually make sure you're building
demonstrate
something
that it's
better.
working
So
is
a year from now, don't look
Also,
back and say we have an
getting,
awesome process,
senior
but we're still
management
building shitty stuff.
the
So.
training, getting them to buy into what Agile really is, because the
I have
Agile
a few
organization
thoughts on
needs
that.
to
One
form
is
as
that I agree with
as a,
doing it
a
before
whole
the tool,
functional team.
getting it down.
can't be Pat, just the Kanban we use just engineering releasing products. Containers and sticky notes to get the process down first before we went to a tool.
We went through a similar thing in a previous company. It was large telco where we changed from waterfall to agile. And one approach we applied was actually rolling it out in an agile fashion. We put a small team together and we started working agile just by rolling the process out. So we built up the habits. And one key thing for us was it was about agile with a lower A instead of an upper A. It was not so much about the process, but getting the agile mindset going and all of this stuff. That was key to roll it out.
Engagement is important to be successful.
And something that worked well for us too in rolling this out was pick a couple of few rules, that really matter the most. Like you're going to read these books and there's going to be, like you'll just be overwhelmed with things you want to do. Maybe just pick 3 things that matter the most. And I know this was like 10 years ago on the Eclipse team, and we picked 2 things, which is we're going to ship something every iteration, and we're never going to miss our release date. Like that was all that guided what we're doing. And that was it. And then every year we added things. Okay, we're going to think about maybe delivering things.
We went through a similar thing in a previous company. It was large telco where we changed from waterfall to agile, and one approach we applied was actually rolling it out in an agile fashion. We put a small team together.
If you weren't doing the retrospective
started
and you
working
weren't
agile
shipping
just
and
by
releasing
rolling
at
the
the end of the
process out,
iteration,
so we built
how
up
did you
the
address
habits.
that?
And one key thing for us was it was about agile with a lower A instead of an
the goal of our process is we said
not so much about
enterprise
the process,
software teams sucked. Like
agile
go back 10 years ago,
and all of
when you're
this stuff
shipping
that was
enterprise
key to roll
software,
it
it
out.
was a release cycle of 2 years, 2.5 years. It was unpredictable.
And something that worked
So
well for
the
us
first
too
goal
in
says,
rolling
okay,
this out was
the thing
pick
we
a
wanted to
couple
solve,
of few rules.
and this again, the
that
value
really matter the
wanted
most.
to become predictable.
Like you're going to read these books
and we
and
wanted
there's
to
going
be that more iterative.
like you'll just be
So we
overwhelmed
didn't think
with
about
things you want to do.
retrospective.
Maybe just
Pick
pick
3 things that matter the most. And I know what we think. This was like 10 years ago on the Eclipse team, and we picked 2 things, which is we're going to ship something every iteration, and we're never going to miss our release date. Like that was all that guided what we're doing, and that was it. And then every year we added things. Okay, we're going to think about maybe delivering things. We're going to do retrospective. Like retrospective we did after the fact. So we had a couple of few rules, and then we added them as we went.
And again, depending upon the size of your
Can I
organization.
just ask a question there? If you weren't doing the retrospectives and you weren't shipping and releasing at the end of the iteration, how did you address that?
I'll even walk into
in
a
that first
team
year?
and we won't even call it agile.
Again, the goal
We'll
was
just
to,
bring teams together.
the
in
goal of our
morning,
process is we
and
said,
we'll have them talk about
enterprise
what they're gonna
software teams
accomplish each day,
sucked. Like
and
go
there's
back
a
10 years
ceremony,
ago,
and we
when
get
you're
that
shipping enterprise
practice
software,
going,
it
we
was
get that
a release
behavior
cycle of 2 years,
teams
2.5
coming
years. It was
together,
unpredictable.
and gradually over time
So
we
the
introduce
first goal
another
says, okay,
ceremony. Again,
the
not
thing we
for
wanted to
everyone,
solve,
but that's a
and this
practice
again,
that
the
we've
value
seen
wanted is
success
wanted to
with.
become predictable, and we wanted to do that more iteratively. So we didn't think about retrospectives or process. We just really thought
I'd like
that's
to hear your
what we
thought
think is
and
going to give us
experience
the best
on,
value, and then we added to it over
the
the years.
Agile methodology on
Actually, all those
software
things
development,
came through
but with
benevolent dictatorship because they came from me.
with,
I own the business that
just
became
a tight
Eclipse.
budget.
So I
Like
just told
how do
people
you
that's the way
manage
it's supposed to work.
your user
And
stories,
IBM
your
invented a
sprint,
process
your
later.
backlog? Like if you have
Yeah,
a
I
fixed
think
budget, how do you
gradually
manage
easing
that,
into each of
and
the
how do you
ceremonies is a
approach that?
really good practice for the enterprise.
I'll
And
let one of
again,
you guys
depending upon the
take that.
size of your
Budget-
organization,
Usually I don't let
the
that
disparate
conflict
nature of
with
the
my
group, but
methodology, but
we
I'll let
we always see value in easing
I remember
into
someone telling me
ceremonies.
that
So
when there's
I'll
a
even
fixed
walk
budget,
into
the
a
best thing you
team
can do with
and we
Agile
won't even call it
is
agile.
you can tell them, I'm going to
We'll
save you
just
money.
Bring teams together in the
Because
morning.
what are you going to do? You're
and
going to
we'll
ship
have
it
them talk
more
about what
often.
they're gonna
I'm going to
accomplish
ship
each
it
day,
every
and there's a
week, and you can
ceremony.
decide when to
And we
stop
get that
paying me.
practice going. We
When you
that
get enough
behavior
value out of it.
instilled,
So you're like, you know
and
what?
teams
I can
coming
actually,
together,
fixed budget
and
doesn't mean
gradually
anything.
over
I'm going
time
to
we
give you
introduce
something,
another
and you
ceremony.
tell me when to
Again,
stop.
That's not for
And it's your
everyone,
job
but
to figure
that's
out how to
a
give
practice
something
that
more
we've seen
iteratively.
success.
And then in theory, they should be able to say, I've got my money worth. Thanks a lot. So
Hi,
we should be thinking about this in a different way.
I'd like to hear your thought and experience on using the Agile methodology on software development, but with
I'll go ahead here. I think
with
people in front of me,
just
but,
a tight budget.
I'm
Like
working in a
how
group
do you
right now,
manage
our team,
your user stories,
the
your
product
sprint,
owner
your
for
backlog?
the project I'm on.
Like if you have a
is
fixed budget,
very,
how do you manage that?
hands-off,
And
very
how do you
difficult to
approach
reach.
that?
He doesn't show up to our
I'll let
our
one of
planning
you guys
meetings.
take that. Budget.
He often
Usually
doesn't
I don't
come to
let
the
that
demos at the
conflict
ends
with
of
my
the sprints.
methodology, but I'll let
He'll just pop in.
I remember someone
occasionally
telling me
and say,
that when
I
there's a
need
fixed
this, I
budget,
need
the best
that.
thing you can do with Agile
And,
is you can tell them, I'm going to
as a
save you
Scrum
money.
Master, I have to juggle
Because
all
what
that.
are you going to do? You're going to ship it
basically get to
more
lead the
often. So you're gonna, I'm going to ship it
project
every
owner as well.
week, and you can decide when to
So
stop paying me.
How do I
when you get enough
address
value
that?
out of it.
What
So you're like, you know what? I
strategies
can
we
actually,
use to try
fixed
and get
budget
that
doesn't mean
product
anything.
owner
I'm going to
more
give you
involved?
something, and you tell me when to stop. And it's your job to figure out how to give
I have a
something
few
more iteratively.
suggestions on that.
And then in theory, they
you know,
should be able to
that's
say,
a
I've got my
very
money worth.
frequent and
Thanks a
common
lot. So
experience.
you should be thinking about this
It
in a
hits
different
home
way.
for me in the enterprise. That was my product owner for years, and I was a Scrum Master. And the way I addressed it was I made pain, no barrier.
I'll go ahead here. I think
no
there's
excuses.
people
I
going to be in
provided
front of
them
me,
with
but
no room, no wiggle room.
I'm working in a
on
group right
excuses
now.
on
Our
visiting
team,
the team or are
the
working or
product
interacting
owner
with the team,
for
way I did
the
that
project
was
I'm on
we
is
recorded
very
videos in our retrospectives.
hands-off,
We
very
recorded,
difficult to reach.
daily
He doesn't
delivery
show up
notes.
to
We
our
sent and shipped,
planning meetings.
you know, manifests on a regular
He
basis
often
to that
doesn't come to the
person, and
demos
really
at the
got
ends of the sprints.
our evidence in front of them
He'll
to
just
involve
pop in
them more.
occasionally and
what
say,
happened
"Oh, I
through
need
that
this, I need
channel
that."
of that product
And
owner seeing us reaching out,
as a Scrum
and them
Master,
being on
I
the
have
road
to
and
juggle
actually
all that. I
distributing
basically
technology
get to
to
be
them,
the project
they became
owner
more
as well.
involved in
So
future iterations.
how do
They
I
started to attend
address
more
that?
and,
What
become more
strategies
aware
can I
of our
use to
process.
try and get
But
that product
it's
owner more
common. You're gonna
involved?
see it, and good for you stepping up and becoming a little bit more of a I have a few suggestions on that. You know, that's a very frequent and common experience. It hits home for me in the enterprise. That was my product owner for years, and I was a Scrum Master. And the way I addressed it was I made no barrier for them to, no excuses. I provided them with no room, no wiggle room on excuses on visiting the team or working or interacting with the team. The way I did that was we recorded videos in our retrospectives. We recorded daily delivery notes. We sent and shipped manifests on a regular basis to that person and really got our evidence in front of them to involve them more. And what happened through that channel of that product owner seeing us reaching out and them being on the road and actually distributing technology to them, they became more involved in future iterations. They started to attend more and become more aware of our process. But it's common. You're going to see it. Good for you stepping up and becoming a little bit more of a proactive product owner.
The product-oriented organizations do design first. Get most of the things wrong. Our envisioning activity, we basically have a team that serves the role of the product owner. And in integrated product teams for years, there's always been kind of a technical-facing product owner and a marketing-facing product owner. One of the problems is a lot of people don't realize that Agile just burns out classic product owners, particularly when you don't have people that understand the domain. And so you need to put a structure in place. And so when you're putting Agile into an organization, you need to know how much time am I going to get for this. The other issue is if you're designing a complicated product, envisioning basically puts a design team there, and the design team actually produces the surrogate design. And that design has enough in it that it can answer a lot of the basic questions. If you just throw the thing into an Agile development process, then you have all sorts of problems with really lumpy backlogs. The product-oriented organizations do design first, get most of the things wrong in that design, and then they give it to engineering to build. Trying to do that without a design team, I think, is very, very difficult to do successfully.
And just one more add-on to that, I agree with that completely, except back to the gentleman on the embedded side with long durations of product shipment dates. That can become dangerous because your market may have disappeared, right? So you may be designing things towards a market that's changed completely. If we're designing a product that's going to ship in 18 months, you've got to get that market-facing sort of product owner into your camp on a regular basis so you don't miss the market.
So we prototype in a VME card cage, so we're actually, in the design process, we're actually building stuff in the hardware environment. In the current product or the next generation, with the next generation, the next set of chips or whatever it is. So that's how we try and get around that.
They're an iteration ahead, what have you, and there's something more of an input into a.
We had solved a similar problem with the product.
So depending on how big the design team is, ideally, of course, would be you have one designer or multiple designer embedded in the teams.
It took getting to that
I've worked in
point
environments where
we
we work one
had full
iteration
engagement.
ahead. Other teams on the same product worked in the same iteration. It depends on the maturity of the project
performance
team.
in the field, those kinds of things need to be part of what the product owner is concerned with, as well as
some of them actually changed
representing the customer.
throughout the product
That made a
development
big difference
process.
for us.
We figured out, well, it's better we work one iteration ahead, and then
So I have a question
ran
about
two backlogs,
design,
one for the
interaction design. I guess
designers,
it's
and then
targeted
we handed it
at
over to the
Jürgen, but
developers, and they
I'd
did the
appreciate your
estimates on
thoughts.
this one. The
So
other one,
we've been
I would call
rapidly
more mature
growing our
team.
design team, meaning
We had
sort
one
of
backlog,
interaction,
and the
visual,
designers catch something quickly.
user research.
The developers build.
So the question
and
to you
in
is,
parallel,
do you kind of
did the
embed
visual
them in the
design
Scrum
and applied it
teams?
on it, and
They
actually
have
then shipped it
subtasks they
together.
contribute to sort of burn down, or is it
There
something
is no
that's sort
hard
of
rule.
more of a lead indicator?
Depends on the
They're
members in the team.
iteration ahead,
Yeah.
what have you, and there's something more of an input into a particular sprint.
So depending on how big the design team is, ideally, of course, would be you have one designer or multiple designer embedded in the teams. I've worked in environments where they work one iteration ahead. Other teams on the same product worked in the same iteration. It depends on the maturity of the project team. how good they work together, and some of them actually changed throughout the product development process. We figured out, well, it's better we work one iteration ahead, and then we ran two backlogs, one for the designers, and then we handed it over to the developers, and they did the estimates on this one. The other one, I would call more mature team, they had one backlog, and the designers catch something quickly, the developers built, and in parallel, did the visual design and applied it on it, and actually then shipped it together. There is no hard rule. It depends on the members in the team.
If you have a design group, blow it up. Move them into the team.
That's why we separated these two, right? So
which one worked better?
Ideally, you have them in the same iteration, because you get some stuff like one of the key principles is to constantly build and fake as little as possible. Like if you one iteration ahead, or sometimes even two iterations ahead, we say like fake it if you can't make it, and then we get results on the, let's say, on the prototypes from the usability test. Yeah. So which one is better? Again, depends how complex the product is, depends how much legacy code you have in there, because even if you want to ship something every iteration, sometimes it's not possible.
Sprint-based engagement is embedded and continuous.
Add on to that, or we should get this gentleman right here.
Just don't let the design people stay in an ivory tower, right? They're worse than the database people or the DevOps guys. They, if you have a design group, blow it up. Move them into the teams.
So we're at the point now where
that's why we separated these two, right? So end caps.
Between our QA and our developers. I mean, we want to get them closer together.
If I was just to add one more thing, and then I'll let you
kind of
go
break
for
down
it.
the barrier.
Just with what we've experienced is we've done both our quality engineering organization and our user experience organizations. We tend to have folks embedded in teams, and we have a center of excellence for each of those areas, so that some of the bigger designs, more advanced things are in the center of excellence, and the sprint-based engagement is embedded and continuous. All stories and all tasks are testable, so we're testing in the smallest. We're developing the smallest testable chunks, so that everything is testable along the way.
Yes, sir. Go.
Another thing is
Okay.
having each
One of the questions that I have is around basically. So we're at the point now where we've been doing Agile for over a year, but we still seem to have this barrier between our QA and our developers. I mean, we want to get them closer together, working closer together, and kind of break down the barrier. Well, we can't go off and test this till everything's done, which means you can't test an individual story. They want to wait till the whole feature's done. Some ideas that you may have on how to break down that barrier.
So we definitely had that problem. And a few things that we did to solve that. One is that we really pushed heavily that all stories and all tasks are testable. So we're testing in the smallest, we're developing the smallest testable chunks so that everything is testable along the way. Another thing is having each team with capable sandboxes, so that they can deploy to sandboxes regularly, and quality engineers can iterate in those sandboxes before promoting anything to any other environment. And thirdly is we increase the capability of our quality engineers in the team so that they're technically capable of automating. All of our quality engineers automate, and they, as often as possible, they're collaborating with developers on a regular basis. And those tests, the regression tests and any acceptance tests, have been written on a regular basis along with the code delivery.
So I think we follow the same pattern. The first thing is they actually sit side by side. So the QA team is not in another building, another floor. So the Jira QA team is with the Jira team. When they actually start a sprint or a feature, they sit down together. And again, I think we've increased the skill set of the QA engineers we're hiring. So we expect them to be able to automate things. And we actually expect them to be able to educate the developers. So they're actually specialists at certain things. So they know how to security test. They know what kind of things you usually fuck up with. So they sit down at the beginning of the iteration and go, okay, you're going to be building a new UI for Jira. Here's the things you're going to have to think about at the beginning. And then we deploy regularly to a sandbox. And the QA engineers are always encouraged to go test the things as it's being built. So, I mean, for that, I think it's really helped. And there's also acceptance tests at the end, but just bring them as part of the whole life cycle has really helped.
Agree. Keep them a part of the design. Sit them next to the teams. Those are all best practices for sure.
Historically,
Don't hire testers, just hire developers and have them change roles.
The Scrum of Scrums is
Wow.
without having a room full. We are about 2 years in. Can I go? Okay, we're about 2 years into our Scrum implementation, and our ongoing challenge has been more cross-team coordination. We have several Scrum teams implemented, and so our ongoing challenge is more cross-team coordination and then having visibility into deliverables more so at an epic level so that we can kind of understand how the teams are progressing from a strategic level. We have strategic initiatives that we're trying to keep track of at a much higher level than what the teams individually work at. So, historically, I've tried to implement a Scrum of Scrums, and the Scrum of Scrums is without having a room full of people meeting to discuss different parts of deliverables. I just haven't had very much success implementing a Scrum of Scrums historically, and it looks like we may revisit that or look at other options. So just wondering what kind of recommendations you have for me.
Yeah. What are you using for tools? Are you using any tooling, electronic tooling, or any visual boards, any sort of placement for the?
Well, one thing that I've done is implemented the structure plugin by Igor to try to tie stories into a higher level and then try to track them that way. But as far as tools outside of the Jira Greenhopper realm, and maybe some supplementation from project, those are the tools that we have for visibility.
Scrum has nothing to say about what happens above teams. There is a book that was written in a hurry to have the answer, but Scrum of Scrums is nonsense for any large organization. The answer is you have to have some kind of architecture and some set of interfaces, and you have to have a dependency map, which you should do at the beginning, not use Structure 101 to get all the wrong dependencies afterwards. Right? That's another example of a tool in the wrong place. So you really need to look at how software engineering organizations work, because Scrum isn't going to solve that problem.
And guys, we've only got time for one more question. So
can I just do one quick response
Oh,
there? So
apologies,
we actually did away with Scrum of Scrums. It became ineffective. I think it was useful early on because it was educational for us to tune our teams. But we ended up doing away with it. But I agree with the architectural and engineering practice oversight, but you also have the business oversight, right? That you actually have business priorities, you're sifting those at the higher level. The management teams, executive teams need to be as agile as the product delivery teams are, and are coordinated so that the product delivery teams can align with the business goals and adding value on a continuous basis.
Could you guys elaborate on Scrum ban a little bit? With Scrum, the thing at least we are experiencing is people get hung up over the iteration boundaries. And with Kanban, I don't know much about it, but I'm uncomfortable with the idea of not having a time box. So any thoughts on?
That is Scrum ban, basically. You have
Right.
a clock, which is not allowed in Kanban, but is allowed in Scrum, and you put them together. Scrum ban basically is Kanban with a clock. Although we can have an expert view.
So for us, Scrumban is your practices of continuous delivery are irrespective of when you're going to be delivering to the field, right? You're continuing with a cadence of constantly working through features and finishing them, so they're deliverable. However, you have an iteration that you're delivering to the field. You've got other things that you're aligning within the business for release cycles, and whatever's ready to align with that release cycle, you release it. And that's how we operate with Scrumban.
All right, guys, thank you very much. Thanks to our panelists, Dave Thomas, Randall Ward, Jean-Michel, Dave Jellison, and Jürgen Spangel. Thanks, guys.